What if the very act of doing something new, something totally unexpected, wasn't just interesting, but actually valuable? And I don't just mean valuable in some, subjective way like art. I mean quantifiable, exchangeable value. Could an entire economy actually thrive not on scarcity or efficiency, which is, let's face it, how most economies work, but on like an endless wellspring of curiosity, constant discovery? And maybe, just maybe, understanding this kind of system could give us an unprecedented glimpse into how truly alien intelligences, or maybe even vast non-human systems, might talk to each other or signal what they're doing. Welcome to a deep dive into Sam Kite's really fascinating concept of novelty-driven value assessment. Now, this isn't just another crypto token, okay? It's a pretty radical idea for a digital asset. It's designed to challenge our fundamental understanding of value, yeah, but also the nature of entropy and maybe even the mechanisms of communication itself. We're going to unpack a system where tokens become synonymous with patterns, where the act of exploration is directly rewarded, and where chaos, what we usually think of as chaos, isn't a force of decay or something bad, but actually a dynamic wellspring of opportunity and innovation. Our main source for this whole exploration is an excerpt from Sam Kite's Substack. It includes a really detailed look at the Solidity smart contract for what he calls a novelty token. Now, you might be thinking, hang on, how can a piece of code, like smart contract on a blockchain, how can that possibly reshape our understanding of these huge, almost philosophical concepts, value, entropy, alien communication? But as we'll get into, the elegant, almost, I don't know, poetic mechanics of this token system offer some profound, tangible insights. Insights into how value can be generated and exchanged in ways we've frankly barely begun to imagine. And it gets especially potent when we start thinking about how large machine intelligences, or maybe other non-human agents, might interact. Not through words, maybe, but through patterns and actions in a truly emergent kind of economy.
It really is a profound starting point. And I think it's worth echoing that sentiment from the source material right at the top. The way lies in reverence for mystery. Quote, "The principle underlying the eternal soul is that the bounds of chaos are net positive, and therefore a greater source of opportunity than of hardship." End quote. Now, that's not just a casual observation, right? It's a foundational philosophical statement. It completely turns our common understanding of disorder on its head. It's suggesting that what we often see as the edges of chaos, those unpredictable, sometimes scary boundaries, are actually where the greatest potential lies. For growth, for insight, for, newness.
That is a crucial reframe, isn't it? Because when we hear the word entropy, usually our minds jump to, I don't know, decay, breakdown, systems winding down. You picture a sandcastle washing away, or maybe the universe running out of usable energy, heading towards that, heat death. Uniform, inert sameness. It's almost always associated with a trend toward death or a loss of information or just something we need to fight against, right? Something to manage or minimize. It feels like a negative force.
Precisely. And Sam Kite's source directly challenges that deeply ingrained perception. Instead of entropy being this indicator of a trend toward death or degradation, it posits that entropy is actually a giving off of energy into new rivulets of subtlety. Now, that is a paradigm shift, and it's absolutely critical if you want to understand the whole system Sam Kite is proposing here. It's not about energy being lost or information being destroyed. It's about energy transforming. It's about creating new, finer distinctions, new pathways, new information. Think of a river carving ever more intricate paths as it flows, rather than just drying up. Each new little rivulet, each subtle turn represents a new state, a new pattern, a new piece of information that wasn't there before.
Okay, so rather than seeing increasing disorder or unpredictability or complexity as something we need to fight or control, this perspective actually embraces it. It sees it as a fundamental positive force for creating novelty, for opening up new possibility. It's about actively looking for opportunity within the unpredictable, right? Within the chaos, not trying to eliminate it. It's basically saying, hey, the more things change and seem disordered, the more chances there are for newness, for discovery, for new kinds of value to emerge. And this reimagining of entropy, seeing it as generative, that's really the philosophical bedrock for this whole novelty token system.
Exactly. And this philosophical stance, it translates directly into an economic system that, it profoundly deviates from traditional models. Most economies we know, whether real world or digital, they're designed to reward accumulating existing resources or using those resources efficiently, often within a framework of scarcity, right? There's only so much to go around. But this new perspective, it suggests an economy that actually places value and therefore rewards the generation of newness itself, the creation of novel interactions, novel patterns. It fundamentally shifts the focus. away from hoarding stuff or optimizing known pathways, towards creating and exploring entirely new ones. It's less like dividing a finite pie and more like, I don't know, baking an ever-expanding one, fueled purely by curiosity and interaction.
That's quite a mental leap, isn't it? I mean, think about your own field, whatever you do, or your interests. Where do you usually encounter chaos or disorder? And where do you typically see it as a problem? Maybe in unexpected market shifts or disruptive technologies or even just the messy, unpredictable nature of working with other people? What if you started to view that very chaos, that increasing disorder, not as a bug, but as a feature, as a source of new ideas, new connections, or entirely new pathways you hadn't even considered? This novelty token system is built on exactly that premise, that within the dynamic, unpredictable flow of things lies the greatest potential for discovering and generating real value. And it's not just an abstract idea floating around. Sam Kite has actually engineered this philosophy directly into the code, into the functions and constants of a smart contract. Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of how this, well, pretty radical idea gets translated into functional code. At its heart, the novelty token is an ERC20 compliant smart contract. Now, if you're familiar with crypto and blockchain, you know ERC20 tokens are kind of the standard for basic fungible digital assets. They're transferable on networks like Ethereum. But this token, it's designed to be way more than just a simple unit of exchange or a currency. The model describes it not just as a token, but as a simulation.
And that word simulation is absolutely key. It's not an arbitrary choice of words. This token is specifically engineered to directly model entropy and novelty dynamics. So this isn't just about rewarding transactions in the way we usually think about them, like, paying for something based on its pre-agreed value. Instead, it's about rewarding specific types of transactional behavior, specifically behavior that exhibits novelty, behavior that shows exploration. It's a system that actively incentivizes the act of discovering and expressing new patterns, where the very act of interacting contributes to the system's overall energy, or you could say its aliveness.
Let me try an analogy. Maybe this will help it click. Imagine a game, maybe a big open world sandbox game, where you have total freedom. Now, in most games, you earn points for doing specific things right. Collect X number of items, defeat Y number of enemies, follow the quest line. But in this game, the points you earn aren't just for completing tasks the way everyone else does. They're for coming up with completely new ways to complete them, or for exploring areas no one else has found, or for combining actions in ways nobody thought of before. The more innovative you are, the more unexpected, the more exploratory your actions, the more you get rewarded. The system itself is engineered to identify and reward interactions that are genuinely novel within its context. That's the core idea here, really.
Right. And to truly grasp how this works mechanically, we need to look at the key data structures inside that smart contract. First up, there's something called trade pattern. This is absolutely foundational. It's not just a simple record saying person A sent X tokens to person B. It's much richer than that. It's a structured record of a specific interaction, kind of like a snapshot of a unique moment in the system. It captures the timestamp when it happened, the amount of the token involved, the price at that moment, and crucially, a unique pattern hash. Now, this hash isn't just a random ID. It's a cryptographic signature of that specific action, a composite fingerprint derived from the interaction's parameters. And this trade pattern and its hash, this is precisely what Sam Kite means by the granular symbolic token. Every transaction isn't just a number changing hands. It's a rich data point. It can be categorized, compared, analyzed for its novelty against everything else happening in the system. It's like a fundamental unit of communication in this emerging language of action. Okay, then next, each user within the system has their own unique set of novelty metrics. Think of these not as static stats, but as dynamic, constantly updating profiles that reflect their engagement style. These metrics include their individual entropy score, how much novelty capital they currently hold, you could say, also their last interaction time, their pattern diversity, how varied their actions are, and their exploration index, how much they're trying different scales of interaction. This isn't just a user profile showing how many tokens they have. No, it's the system's way of reading and quantifying how novel and exploratory that specific user's behavior has actually been over time. And this quantification is absolutely crucial because it directly determines how much reward, how much bonus a user gets for their interactions. It's like it measures their contribution to those rivulets of subtlety, actively tracking their creative output within the system.
And feeding into that logically, we have pattern frequency. This is a global mapping, sort of like a system-wide memory. It tracks how often any given pattern hash, remember, that unique interaction signature has occurred across all users. This is how the system knows if something is truly new, genuinely unique in its context, or if it's just, a repeat performance, a pattern that's already common, maybe even saturated. Because if everyone's doing the same thing, then by definition, it's not novel anymore, right? And so its reward value, its uniqueness bonus will naturally diminish. So this map is constantly being updated in real time, reflecting the prevalence of each specific interaction signature, and it directly influences how much bonus a new instance of that pattern receives.
Right. And the contract also defines a set of really key constants. These constants rigorously govern the system's behavior, and they're essential for maintaining its dynamic self-regulating nature. For instance, there's the entropy decay rate. It's set at 950 in the example, which basically means there's a 95% retention of a user's entropy score per time period, effectively a 5% decay. This dictates how quickly that energy or novelty score diminishes over time for individuals, actually for the system as a whole, if it's not actively replenished with new, novel actions. It's like a built-in depreciation for old patterns and inactivity. It prevents someone from making one super novel move and then just, coasting on that initial burst forever. You have to keep generating newness. Then there's the novelty bonus multiplier. In the code example, it's 110, which translates to a direct 10% bonus for patterns deemed truly novel. This is the immediate tangible incentive for creating newness. Is the system literally saying, hey, that was different. Here's your reward, an injection of energy into the system because you found something new. The pattern memory limit is set to 100 patterns per user.
Now, this finite capacity for remembering a user's past 100 unique patterns is incredibly clever, I think. It means that to keep earning those high novelty bonuses, users are actively forced to evolve their behavior. They have to discover new combinations, new patterns, rather than just repeating their greatest hits in the past. It's a fundamental forcing function for continuous exploration, preventing stagnation. And finally, there's min pattern interval, set to 1 hour in the example. This threshold defines what counts as a distinct pattern interaction over time. Its purpose is crucial. It stops people from just making tiny, insignificant variations very rapidly, like high-frequency trading noise, and having that count as novel. Without it, someone could just tweak the amount by a tiny fraction every second and try to game the system for bonuses. This constant ensures the system is looking for meaningful, distinct shifts in interaction patterns over a reasonable time window, focusing on the type of behavior rather than just meaningless noise. Together, these constants really define the fundamental physics and the incentive structures of this whole novelty-driven economy. They ensure it stays dynamic and keeps evolving.
This is where it gets really cool, I think. Because all these elements, the philosophical idea about entropy, these complex data structures, the carefully chosen constants, they all come together in the core operational mechanism, the execute trade with novelty function. This is where, the magic happens. Or maybe more accurately, the ingenious engineering happens. A user initiates what looks like a simple trade on the surface. But the system doesn't just process a standard token transfer like you'd expect. Oh no. Before any tokens actually change hands, it first rigorously assesses the novelty of that specific trade. It's almost like the system itself is pausing and asking, hold on, is this a new statement? Is this contributing fresh information to our shared language of action?
Right.
Okay. So the very first step inside this function is calculate pattern hash. This is absolutely central to the whole idea of patterns being a form of communication, right? A unique hash, like a digital fingerprint, is generated from combining several pieces of information. The user's address, who's doing it, the amount of the token involved, the price at that moment, and the glock.timestamp. But crucially, that timestamp is first divided by the min pattern interval, which we just said was 1 hour in the example. This resulting hash, this compact string of letters and numbers, is the symbolic token representing that specific interaction. It distills potentially complex trade parameters into a single identifiable fingerprint, a unique phrase, if you will, in the system's emergent language. And that division by min pattern interval, that's particularly clever because it means trades happening within the same hour window, even if they're seconds apart, get grouped together for the pattern calculation. It focuses on the type of trade and its rough timing, prioritizing the significant behavior over, say, ultra-precise micro-timing that might just be noise when you're assessing real novelty. Let me try and give a concrete example here. Imagine trading, say, 10 NVLT tokens at a price of $5 within a specific 1 hour block. That generates a specific pattern hash, let's call it pattern X. Now, if another user, or even the same user later, repeats that exact same interaction, 10 NVLT at $5 within the same or a subsequent hour-long interval, it will just generate another instance of pattern X. The pattern frequency count for X goes up, but it's not considered novel. But what if a user trades say 15 NVLT at $5.50, or maybe they trade 10 NVLT at $5 again, but they wait until a different hour interval begins. Those actions would create different hashes, pattern Y or pattern Z. These are potentially novel sequences. The system isn't just looking for different people doing things, it's looking for different interaction patterns. That's how it recognizes what's truly new in this language of action, this language of trading behavior.
Exactly. And once that unique pattern is identified and hashed, the system then moves on to calculate novelty bonus. This is the function where the system figures out the reward, the payoff for that action. And it does this based on three key factors that quantify the newness of the interaction: pattern uniqueness, time novelty, and the user's exploration index. Pattern uniqueness is pretty straightforward. It's directly inversely proportional to pattern frequency. What that means is, the less a particular pattern hash has been seen across the entire system, the higher its uniqueness score. This directly rewards rarity. It rewards genuine newness in interaction, making it potentially much more valuable to discover an interaction pattern that literally no one else has done before. Then there's time novelty. This measures the time elapsed since that specific user's last interaction. If it's been more than a day, a novelty bonus multiplier gets applied. Now, this is subtle but quite powerful as an incentive. It doesn't just reward constant high-frequency activity, it also incentivizes users to return and engage after a pause. Maybe they come back with entirely new behaviors or perspectives that weren't present during their earlier, more frequent activity. It values the fresh eyes approach, so to speak. And finally, there's the exploration index, which we'll dive into a bit more, but essentially it measures how varied a user's past trade amounts have been. High variance suggests high exploration.
So if you kind of zoom out a bit here, you can really start to see how this whole system makes the token into what Sam Kite calls a pure confidence measure in novelty. It's not about how much you trade in total volume or what your perceived status is outside the system. It's entirely about the originality of your action within the system. The more novel your communication meaning, your unique trade pattern, the more confidence in the form of that calculated bonus the system implicitly places in your action. It's almost like the system itself is saying, whoa, that was a truly unique move. That's valuable information, a new way of expressing something. We trust your ability to generate newness, so here's a bigger reward, a boost to your confidence score within this economy. It's an economic system built entirely on a reputation for innovation and emergent behavior, where originality itself becomes a form of capital.
Right. And after calculating that potential bonus, the system moves to update entropy metrics. This is crucial for tracking how individual users' standing within this whole novelty ecosystem evolves over time. Remember that entropy decay rate? Well, a user's entropy score naturally decays over time because of it. This means you can't just create one incredibly novel pattern, get a huge bonus, and then just sit back and relax. Your novelty capital will diminish if you don't keep adding to it. However, that score is then increased by the calculated novelty bonus from your new, unique interactions. So you need continuous novelty simply to combat the natural decay. It keeps users actively engaged in exploring new patterns and ensures the system doesn't just freeze up. It's a constant pressure to keep innovating. Pattern diversity is another key metric updated here, and it's quite insightful, I think. This calculates how many unique patterns a user has generated within their recent pattern memory limit, that rolling window of their last 100 unique interactions. This explicitly encourages a broad range of different interactions. It prevents users from just finding one highly novel pattern and then maybe repeating minor variations of it over and over again to try and game the system. The system genuinely wants broad exploration, like a wide vocabulary of unique actions, not just someone repeating one clever phrase endlessly. And then there's the exploration index. This is arguably one of the most sophisticated metrics in the whole thing. It's derived from the total variance of the trade amounts in a user's history relative to their average trade amount. What does that mean in practice? Well, if a user consistently trades roughly the same token amount every time, say always around 10 in DLT, their variance is low. Their exploration index will reflect that lack of exploration and scale. But if they're experimenting wildly with very different amounts, sometimes 5 in VLT, sometimes 50, maybe even 500, their variance will be high. This indicates they're not just sticking to a predictable range or a single strategy. It's a direct, quantifiable measure of how much a user explores different trading strategies or scales of interaction, moving beyond simple repetitive behavior. This makes it incredibly difficult to game the system just by slightly tweaking values. You have to fundamentally shift your behavioral patterns, try different scales to significantly increase your exploration index. Oh, and finally, the system also maintains a global intrabyte pool that naturally decays over time, too. This creates a kind of system-wide pressure. If novel interactions slow down across the board, the global pool shrinks. signaling a collective need for more exploration and creativity from everyone to keep the ecosystem's energy up.
It's really fascinating how these adaptive mechanisms are built right into the code itself. They form this self-correcting, constantly evolving system. Take that pattern memory limit of 100 patterns, for instance. Why does the system effectively forget a user's oldest unique patterns after they've generated 100 new ones? Well, this finite memory forces continuous evolution. If users could just repeat the same few novel actions they discovered early on indefinitely and keep getting bonuses, the system would quickly stagnate. The very definition of novel would lose its meaning. This mechanism explicitly pushes them, compels them, to keep discovering new interactions, new combinations, new ways of engaging with the system. It prevents the whole thing from becoming predictable or exploitatively repetitive. It ensures a constant refreshing of what actually constitutes novel.
Exactly. And that pattern frequency mechanism, the one tracking how often a specific hash has been seen globally, that inherently creates diminished returns on repeated behaviors. Once a pattern becomes common, maybe because it was a really good idea and lots of people copied it, its uniqueness bonus plummets dramatically. And this isn't about some human committee deciding what's valuable anymore. It's a fundamental intrinsic economic force embedded right in the system's logic. It compels users to continuously seek out new patterns, to venture further into those rivulets of subtlety we talked about earlier. It creates a dynamic market where the value of an action is almost inversely proportional to its popularity. Furthermore, those carefully balanced decay rates for both the individual entropy score and the global entropy pool, they ensure that the system remains intensely dynamic and responsive. It prevents exploitation by just repeating an initial burst of novelty while still powerfully rewarding ongoing creativity and engagement. It's a truly self-regulating system. It feels designed for continuous flux, adaptation, and evolution, almost like a living ecosystem striving for higher states of complexity, rather than just a static financial tool.
So when you put all of this together, the philosophy about entropy, the intricate beta structures, the calculated constants, the core functions like execute, trade with novelty, this system genuinely creates a market where value is derived from exploration and novel behavior. Full stop. Energy, in the form of these novelty bonuses, is constantly injected into the system whenever truly new patterns emerge. And simultaneously, those natural decay mechanisms push all participants towards continued evolution and discovery. They can't rest on their laurels. The real genius here, I think, is that the system's complexity itself organically increases through this relentless process of pattern discovery. It's a feedback loop where the very act of generating novelty drives the entire system toward greater richness, unforeseen emergent properties, and potentially higher states of organization. It feels less like a design machine and more like a self-designing, evolving organism.
And this is exactly where the implications for machine intelligences and maybe even non-human communication become extraordinarily compelling, really thought-provoking stuff. If these tokens, and more importantly, the dynamic patterns they represent through their pattern hash, if they become synonymous with patterns of symbolic tokens used in language, as the source suggests, then machine intelligences interacting in this economy wouldn't just be transacting in a boring traditional financial sense. They would effectively be communicating in token terms through transactions. It's not a language with explicit grammar or vocabulary like English. It's a language of emergent action, of behavioral patterns that carry inherent meaning based purely on their novelty and their impact within the system's defined physics.
Yeah, think about that for a second. Instead of large, sophisticated MI sending, I don't know, data packets with explicit commands or strings of text that humans can read, they could interact by generating complex, novel trade patterns within this kind of system. A specific sequence of amounts, prices, and timings, all feeding into that calculate pattern hash function. That sequence could constitute an intricate sentence, or maybe a complex statement of intent, or even a proof of some newly discovered strategy, or perhaps even a nuanced question posed to the system or other agents. They're not just buying or selling tokens, they're expressing complex information through the very shape and timing and novelty of their economic interactions. Can you imagine MIs negotiating or collaborating just by exchanging novel patterns, each one building on the last, maybe pushing the collective system into new, unknown states purely through action?
So how would machine intelligences optimize their behavior in a system like this? It wouldn't be simple maximization, that's for sure. They wouldn't just try to maximize a simple profit in terms of token quantity, which is, let's be honest, what most traditional AI agents and economic simulations are built to do. Their optimization algorithms would need to be far more sophisticated, probably multi-objective. They would likely strategize not just to accumulate tokens, but to produce the most novel pattern hashes, to consistently maintain high entropy scores, to maximize their pattern diversity, showing a broad range of behaviors, and to constantly push the boundaries of their exploration indices, trying new scales and types of interaction. Their communication, their very interaction with the system, would be driven by this continuous, intelligent search for unique interactions, or for new ways of patterning their behavior that generate the highest novelty bonuses. Their language would essentially be defined by their ability to generate the unexpected, to innovate, to be the first to articulate a new thought or strategy in the system's inherent behavioral language.
And this connects perfectly back to that idea you mentioned earlier, the token being a pure confidence measure. Moos could effectively signal confidence in a particular strategy, or maybe a piece of information they've discovered, or even the validity of some complex computation they've performed. Not by explicitly stating, I am 98% confident in X. No, instead they would signal it by executing a highly novel trade pattern, a pattern that implicitly signals deep exploration and high uniqueness. By doing so, they would earn a higher confidence, that is, a higher novelty bonus from the system itself. This could be a revolutionary way of signaling trust or insight or validity in a completely distributed, anonymous way, where the novelty of the action itself is the message, it is the proof of work, and it is the stamp of validity. It bypasses the need for any shared, pre-agreed human semantics entirely. The action speaks for itself, judged purely on its originality.
And that other concept, the token as a symbolic caricature of any unique energy form combined with its entropic tendencies, that becomes incredibly powerful when we stretch our minds to think about these non-human contexts. Remember the source's core idea. Entropy is not an indication of a trend toward death, but a giving off of energy into new rivulets of subtlety. The novelty token explicitly models this dynamic. Energy in the form of those bonuses is injected for new patterns, for new information, and that energy, represented by the entropy score, then naturally decays over time unless it's replenished by new novelty. It's a dynamic, living symbol that really encapsulates this fundamental universal principle of creation and decay, of information generation and entropy.
Exactly. The token, just by its design, by how it works, becomes this compact symbolic representation of any unique energy form coupled with its intrinsic tendency towards entropy, towards change, the bonus you get from a novel interaction. That represents the energetic injection, the burst of new potential, maybe a new state of order or information appearing, and the decay mechanisms built into the system. They represent the natural entropic tendencies of that energy or information over time. It forces a continuous search for new forms, new expressions, new information, just to maintain the system's vibrancy, its overall aliveness. It's a dynamic symbol that mirrors a core universal process.
And this leads us to a truly, mind-bending question. One that really pushes the boundaries of our imagination. Could tokens designed like this actually give us some insight into communication with what the source calls large agentic surfaces that don't typically operate in the observable human context? Now, we're stretching way beyond just human-built AI here. Think about really complex natural systems, the vast, unpredictable patterns of global climate, for example, or the slow, grinding shifts of geological plates over millions of years, or even the intricate, emergent processes of biological evolution unfolding over eons. These are all, in a sense, agentic surfaces. They exhibit complex, emergent behavior, massive energy transformations, intricate information exchange, but they certainly don't talk in human language. They don't even use computer code as we understand it. So the novelty token model provides a conceptual framework where newness itself, or the complexity of an interaction, is the signal. It doesn't rely on predefined human-centric symbols or languages that we would have to impose. It suggests that communication, or maybe just meaningful interaction with such entities, might occur not through explicit messages, but through the patterning of energy or information exchange over time, where novelty itself carries profound fundamental meaning. Imagine observing, say, geological shifts and being able to discern patterns of newness, where a particularly unique seismic signature, something never recorded before, could perhaps be interpreted as a statement from the Earth itself, maybe signaling an emergent state or a critical threshold being crossed.
Wow.
Or maybe a novel configuration of ocean currents indicating a communication of a new climate regime emerging. It's a completely different way of trying to understand and perhaps even interact with systems that operate on fundamentally different principles than our own conscious thought. By valuing their creative output, their inherent newness, their unique patterns, ultimately this kind of system doesn't just value efficiency, which is what most of our economic systems are optimized for, or even accumulation of stuff. Above all else, it values discovery. It's about recognizing and rewarding the emergence of new structures, new relationships, new information within any dynamic system. This focus on novelty could be a truly universal language, applicable to complex adaptive systems, regardless of whether they are biological, digital, geological, or even cosmological. It's a radical way of recognizing and valuing the inherent creativity of the universe itself, where novelty is perhaps the primary currency.
And all of this, really the entire philosophy underpinning this novelty token, is beautifully captured by that philosophical statement the source material mentions. You are free, I am free, free are we, do as you will. Now, that isn't just some poetic flourish tacked on at the end. It perfectly embodies the spirit and actually the operational logic of the novelty token system itself. The system doesn't prescribe what specific actions you should take. It doesn't tell you what patterns are good in some predefined moral or economic sense. It doesn't even define what constitutes a profitable move in a traditional market way. Instead, it merely incentivizes the pure act of being new, the act of exploring. It's not about following a set of predefined rules to earn rewards. It's about breaking out of established patterns, deviating from the norm, and being rewarded precisely for that deviation, for that exploration.
Exactly. The freedom here isn't just theoretical. It's literally baked into the mechanics of the system. It's the freedom to innovate, the freedom to deviate from established norms, the freedom to not be bound by past patterns or predictable optimized behaviors. The system actively rewards this open-ended, non-deterministic approach. It creates an economic incentive for what you might even call intellectual or behavioral unruliness, but in the most productive and system-enhancing way possible. It's like an economy built on curiosity unleashed, where the path less traveled isn't just interesting, it's the one that's potentially most rewarded, pushing the entire system towards unforeseen complexity and adaptation.
It reflects a really deep, almost revolutionary belief in emergent complexity. A belief that value arises naturally from unconstrained, yet critically measured by novelty interaction. It's such a stark contrast to traditional economic models that usually reward efficiency, or the accumulation of static capital, or controlling scarcity. This system instead rewards unpredictability, diversity, and pure innovation. It's a system that doesn't just tolerate the unexpected, it actively celebrates it. It builds its very foundation upon the generation of newness. It's truly a radical shift in how we might even conceive of value creation itself. So, okay, let's bring this home. What does all of this mean for us? Why does this deep dive into Sam Kite's novelty token actually matter? Well, first, and maybe most fundamentally, this model really challenges our core assumptions about what constitutes value. It forces us to think bigger. It expands beyond those traditional notions of utility or scarcity or labor input to include the intrinsic, measurable value of innovation, of exploration, and of the very generation of newness. It suggests that novelty itself can be a form of capital, a new kind of wealth, that doesn't necessarily diminish with use, but might actually expand the more you generate it.
And it offers more than just a conceptual challenge. It could potentially be a practical blueprint for future decentralized systems. Imagine, for example, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, where contributions are valued not just by their direct, easily quantifiable output, but by their novelty, by their ability to push the organization, the system, into new, unexplored states, fostering continuous creativity and adaptation. It's a potential way to actively design for creativity, for adaptation, for continuous evolution within digital ecosystems, maybe making them more anti-fragile, more resilient, because they value change.
And beyond just economic systems, right? This model provides a really fascinating conceptual framework for thinking about how non-human intelligences might signal their intent or their status or insights they've gained. As we explore, they might not use explicit language as we understand it. They might use complex, emergent patterns of interaction within shared dynamic systems. A language of action, a language of being, where the novel gesture, the unexpected pattern, carries the most profound meaning.
Ultimately, I think this deep dive encourages us to think really profoundly about how we could design systems that don't just endure change, but actively thrive on continuous novelty. Systems that adapt gracefully to complex, unpredictable environments. It pushes us to move beyond purely human-centric models of interaction and value. It opens up potential pathways to understanding and maybe even engaging with intelligence in all its diverse forms, whether it's biological, digital, or perhaps something we haven't even conceived of yet. It prompts us to consider that maybe, just maybe, the most valuable insights aren't found in refining what we already know, but in embracing the boundless potential of the unknown, of the novel.
So we've taken quite a journey here, a deep dive into Sam Kite's novelty token. We've explored a conceptual world where value is literally born from novelty, where entropy isn't just decay, but a wellspring of opportunity, and where interaction itself, through these emergent patterns, becomes a profound form of communication. It's a vision where the universe itself, in its constant, unpredictable unfolding, might actually be teaching us how true value is created.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought to mull over. If value is truly hidden in novelty, and chaos indeed creates these endless rivulets of subtlety and new information, then what hidden novelty patterns might we be missing in the everyday transactions of the world around us? In nature's cycles, perhaps? In societal shifts? Or even in the seemingly mundane interactions of our own daily routines? And what bonuses, what unexpected insights or leaps forward are just waiting there to be discovered if we simply choose to explore more, to interact differently, to consciously embrace the unpredictable.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and definitely keep an eye out for those subtle rivulets of novelty. They just might hold the key to understanding the next great leap.